after e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e5. So that's the repertoire I'm going to go through. I played the Rossolimo, and well, lots of things can happen now. I'm gonna make a video for each variation. This video is going to be about Queen c7 variation. So what to do now? The bishop is not under attack, so we can just castle, right? We're moving on to the next step. Let's go through the main move, which is a6. The idea of Queen c7 is to protect the knight so that the black doesn't break the pawn structure. So the white bishop clearly wants to take the knight, and black doesn't want to do either b takes e6 or d takes e6. Well, we're still going to take, and then queen takes back. White is ahead in development. Black only has developed the queen, white has developed the knight, he has a pawn in the center, and has castled the king. So now, rook e1. Let's go through some moves here. The main move here is e6. But we can also try d6 or g6 even. But let's start with e6. Now white plays d4. It looks like a very normal open Sicilian. But the point here is that because we know we are fully developed already, and black doesn't have the knight in c6 anymore that has control over the squares d4 and e5, then that means our knight is going to be very strong. It's going to be activated soon. We have a rook that is active already. And now, in fact, we don't take this. We actually play c3. We want to speed up development. And this is not a gambit. This is not some sort of variation of the Smith-Morra gambit. We're actually just better in the engine evaluation and in the development, so we can afford to give another pawn and go for an attack that is not just like a hope variation or something. We're just better here. Now here the idea is to take this pawn and then carry on with the game. So let's look at this, for example, right? Pawn takes. Now, of course, we take the knight. If we were to move again now, we'll be immediately winning the game. The threat is knight to d5. Well, by the way, white is completely winning already here. The threat is knight to d5. Now, the pawn, of course, cannot take back, because then we take back, and there's going to be checked by the rook, and it's a discovered attack on the queen. So then we're going to be winning the game. So that's the threat that we're immediately creating. Let's just see the line, right? Let's say we get to move again. So knight to d5. If bishop to e7, for example, just unpinning the whole thing. Right now, it looks like the pawn can take the knight, because then this is not going to come with a check. Now white can play knight to e5. That's why we eliminated the knight in c6 with the bishop. Knight to e5 attacks the queen. It's already completely over. The white player will play moves like bishop e3 and knight to b6 and win this rook, or knight to c7, making a check and winning the rook. After knight to e5, there's an attack on the queen. The queen will have to move. So, well, okay, b6, there's no access to b6. And in any of the dark squares, the queen will be attacked by the bishop. Bishop e3 will come, and also rook to c1. So let's say, for instance, queen to a4 is not possible because it gets taken. So in neither any of these squares or c7. So let's say queen d6 looks like the queen is safe for the moment, still threatening to take the knight. Now we play knight to c4. We're attacking the queen again. The queen will have to move. So again, there's no access to e5 or f4. The queen will be taking each one of these squares. The queen in c6, for example, will allow the same thing, like even knight to b6 here would be possible. And then we can go and win the rook. Or let's say queen to c5 here, and then knight to b6 as well. The threat is still also to play bishop e3, for example. I mean, this game is becoming a bit of a joke. And now it's black to move. So the best move here, according to the engine, is, well, black leaves the rook there. So pawn to d5, and after take, we play bishop moves, and then the queen will have to move again. Something like queen to c6, and now knight to a5. The bishop is protecting this now. There's still another attack on the queen, and now the queen moves again, once for all, and we can take the rook. This is just black playing engine moves in order to defend himself from a variation that went completely wrong. So let's go back. Here we are, straight after the c3 gambit. Let's call it a gambit, even though it's not, because we're already winning. We played knight takes c3, and now the knight is threatening d5 with all that huge mess that is about to happen. And black tried bishop e7, but it didn't work. So the best move now, according to the engine, is bishop d6, which puts more control over the square e5, and also, well, develops a piece and allows black to castle. So that is the best move. Even then, white now plays bishop e3. This is the perfect square to place this bishop because of this weakness of the b6 square. This b6 square is weak, right? And we're able to target it. The idea now if we could get to play again, will be bishop to d4, and we'd be going for this pawn. This couldn't be stopped. If knight to f6, for example, we will just take, and then we will be taken back, but then rook to c1. And we're putting pressure on this queen. We're still going for the usual threats. The threat here, for example, could be knight to d5. And then the knight from d5 will be targeting the f6 square with check. And then the queen will have to move away from the rook, but we'll also be putting pressure on this bishop in d6 with the queen. So after rook to c1, black's best move will be bishop to f4 attacking the rook, but we simply just lift up the rook to c2, and we're going for the usual threat. Now the best move by black is the swap of queens, the attempt of swapping queens, and we can take it. The reason why we can swap queens in this moment is because, well, we're down the bishop pair, but this is a typical pattern that has to be remembered. In this specific variation, when black plays a6 and there's a weakness in the b6 square, and this bishop in c8 here is looking very silly. We're going to play knight to a4, and now we are threatening knight to b6 with double attack on this bishop, winning a piece. And this is already unstoppable, because, well, what can black do? Okay, let's say black moves the rook, then we're still going to get there. And after black castles, in order to defend the bishop a little bit more, then we play rook e to c1. We are actually going to win a lot of material very soon. So let's go back. Right, here we are. So after the bishop e3 move, the idea, as mentioned, is to play bishop to d4, going for this g7 pawn and trap the rook. A move like f6 here wouldn't stop us. We will still play rook to c1, and the plan will be just very similar. Except this time the black player will not even be able to castle anytime soon. So let's make a very quick recap. e4, c5, and then the two knights, and then bishop e5. Queen to c7, and we just castle. Then a move like a6, here we take the knight. We don't have to worry about the black player being able to safeguard the integrity of the pawn structure, because we're simply going to play rook to e1. And now the move we're going through is e6. So d4, pawn takes, and c3. We are going to go through other lines as well, but let's go through pawn takes again, knight takes e3, and we're just much better here. Remember the threat we're making right now. Best move by black is playing bishop to d6. Well, of course, there is no other pawn move that is good. e5 cannot be pushed, it gets taken. d6 will be met by knight to d5, so the exact same things are happening anyway. Black is compromised because he hasn't developed anything. After knight to d5 here, we're still going for the usual bishop e3, rook to c1. We're completely winning. And so, of course, it would be pointless for me to go through all the millions of different lines that can happen. This is actually a very just enjoyable position to play. Well, d5 is just the stupidest, so it's not even worth being mentioned. So after bishop to d6, we have to play bishop e3 with the idea of bishop d4. We mentioned the two previous lines. Of course, we don't get to play a bit again. But if black doesn't play a move that stops you from playing bishop d4, then you're able to do that. So now let's look at a different black's idea, like b5, right? This seems to make so much more sense, right? And it is a good move, at least trying to hold things together, but the situation is already desperate. Well, black wants to develop the bishop to the only square where it makes sense to do it, because the d pawn will not move. And also this will give some more space to the rook, so after the bishop moves, the rook will move as well. And also the pawn is just going down, trying to gain some space on the queen side, maybe attacking the knight. But anyway, after b5, now we can play knight to d5, right? And in this case, black can try to take the knight. But after take, and queen to c4, for example, the queen is on a light square, so the queen doesn't have to worry about the bishop giving some nasty discover attacks. So for example, with bishop to d4 with an attack on the king, black can even just try something like knight e7 and maybe then play rook to g8 after the pawn gets taken. So I don't really like how things are going. So the best move now is rook to c1. The queen will have to move. The queen cannot go to a dark square because the bishop will move, but it will be check and the bishop will take the queen. So after queen, let's say for example queen to a2, bishop to f4 now gives a check to the king. Only move to try and resist a little bit longer is bishop just back, but then d6. So you can tell how desperate this is. Best move by black now is pawn to f6. The reason is try to create some space for the king to go. And also the knight needs to stay in g8 to protect the bishop because of the threat of rook takes. But still, let's just go on just very few more moves and then we're going to end this line because there's no point. We take the bishop, and after best move d5 and knight to d4, this pawn in e7 is there to stay. It's impossible to be removed. Moves like bishop to d7 will be met by rook to c7, so the rooks are advancing. Right now there's a threat of rook takes bishop that will be met by a king takes, but then maybe even something like queen to g4. making a check, potentially winning this pawn, trapping the rook, whatever. But the game is just going to be a joke now.